Oh, no. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Natalie Applewhite. I joined John Sawyer 16 years ago now when he started the organization. And it's so exciting to see how far we've been able to come over the years. And this gathering is a reflection and a celebration of that growth, and a result of the incredible work of my colleagues and so many of our grantees and partners, many of you with us in person or virtually. So on behalf of the Pulitzer Center, thank you so much for joining us for our 6th annual conference. We're thrilled to bring you all together and hope you'll make the most of the event to share ideas and possible synergies amongst you all. I see a lot of that already happening. For those of you who are less familiar with the Pulitzer Center, we're a nonprofit journalism organization dedicated to raising awareness of underreported global issues and public engagement with systemic issues and education outreach to amplify that work. We provide now over 200 grants a year to freelance and staff journalists, photographers, filmmakers to pursue their reporting projects in collaboration with news outlets increasingly around the world. This session and the next are focused on the intersection of gender and climate. We're grateful to the PIMCO Foundation, who has made so much of our work around gender equity possible, to the Norwegian International Climate and Forest Initiative for our work on rainforests globally, and to the many individual donors and foundations who support our work more broadly. As a nonprofit journalism organization, the support of our audience and partners sustains this work. If you are inspired by what you hear today, please consider supporting us, whether that's just signing up for our newsletter or making a small donation, but most importantly, sharing with others that you think may be inspired by this kind of work. So thank you for being part of the community. For those of you who weren't here earlier, just a few housekeeping items. Please use the hashtag, please use the hashtag Interconnected22 to join the conversation with fellow attendees and follow along with conference insights and activities. A final reminder to our in-person guests: to keep each other safe, we kindly request that you keep your masks on, even though I think technically I was allowed to take mine off here, but habit. So now I'd like to introduce, and please turn your phones off too, or just silence them. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Audrey Tan, who I have finally had the chance to meet. Audrey is one of the Pulitzer Center Advisory Committee members for the Rainforest Journalism Fund in Southeast Asia. She's played an instrumental role in the selection of so many of the projects and successful projects that we support in the region. She is the science and environmental correspondent at the Straits Times in Singapore, covering a broad range of issues from biodiversity, conservation, to climate change. So I will pass it over to Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And hi, everyone. It's really nice to see all of you here. Thank you for joining us for this first session after lunch. It's nice to see everyone in person after the pandemic put paid to travel over the past 2 years. And I think it will be really exciting to have such an important discussion today on this important topic. Today we have 3 very esteemed speakers who will be sharing more about their experience covering and working in this area of the intersection between climate change and gender. So before we get into it, thank you, Natalie, for the introduction. I think that was a great one. I don't have to say anything more about myself. But maybe just some quick words about this intersection between gender and climate change. I think we all know that the impacts of climate change that are manifesting around the world right now, we all experience it differently based on where we are, our socioeconomic status, our gender, and our religion. So today we're going to focus on gender and how that has kind of disproportionately affected women in various parts of the world, especially in developing countries. In certain cases, women in their traditional dress may find it hard to escape disasters when they do happen. And if also a woman is constantly told that her place is in the home, it may be hard for her to seek help elsewhere when disaster strikes. With climate change affecting food crops and food yields everywhere, sometimes food security is a big issue for women as well, because men and boys sometimes tend to get the first share of the food. So today, our panelists today will be talking a bit more about not only the impacts of climate change on women, but also how women are stepping up among their communities to respond to this climate crisis, to rise up above their challenges and to lead their communities and spur greater climate action. So before we begin, let me introduce our panelists today. So to my left, we have Neha. Neha Wadekar is an independent multimedia journalist reporting from across the globe. She reports at the intersections of climate, gender, conflict, and human rights. Neha's work has been published widely, including in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and PBS NewsHour. Very accomplished. On her left, we have Daniela de Silva, a human and environmental rights activist in Middle Xingu, Amazon. In 2021, she founded the Aldeias Project in Altamira, one of the most violent towns in Brazil, with a strong social and environmental vulnerability. She aims to strengthen the relations between children, youth, and the Amazon forest through artistic and socio-economical actions. Finally, we have Pablo Albarenga is a documentary photographer and visual storyteller with a focus on human rights. As a photographer, he has documented the land conflicts in Latin America involving traditional peoples who are confronting large extractive industries to defend and protect their ancestral lands. So you can see today that we have a great lineup, and maybe Neha will invite you to kick us off.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you all for coming to what I think is a very important session on the intersection of climate change and gender. I want to start by sharing a slide, or a short part of a video that I worked on. This is a Pulitzer-supported project that was published in partnership with Time Magazine. It's both a written story as well as a video. So we'll just kick off by showing you about the first 50 seconds, and then I'll jump back in.
Kan nyama taba gartay ijoollee ariyaasiiti waliin taphattee ayee waliin tapheetu dhiqeena nu gurguranii nu nagar.
No girl is being married unless she reaches the age of 18 years and above.
The reality of the matter is it's happening, and it's not reported.
Oh, did it stop? Okay. So the video that we just showed you was like the first 50 seconds of a video that I did with Time. A very talented team of photographers and videographers worked on in partnership with myself. The photographer on the project was Will Swanson, and the videographer was Vanya Turner, and it wouldn't have happened without them, so I wanted to give them a shout out. But basically how this started was, this is northern Kenya. This is a region of Kenya that is very, very different than what you might imagine when you see images of safaris and wildebeest migrations. It's close to the border with Somalia. It's extremely hot and extremely dry. And the people up there live off the land. So these are nomadic pastoralists. All of their wealth and all of their money, all of everything that they have is wrapped up in their animals, in their herds of goats and camels and sometimes cows. And this is an area that's been experiencing recurring drought. And so my team and I wanted to investigate what is the impact of that on women and girls. And, you know, there are the obvious kind of economic impacts and the things around food security and other issues that, you know, we might think of when we first think of what's the impact on women and girls. But what we found was quite an interesting link. We were looking at how climate change actually affects rates of girl marriage and early child marriage. And this is a region that Kenya has been working really, really hard to reverse these trends of early childhood marriage. So in these regions, girls get married as young as 13 years old. They're married off to men who are often far older than them, and of course they do not have a say in the matter. And we were looking at how when drought occurs, these herds of animals often drop dead. And actually I was there recently, earlier this year, and you can see as you drive along these dirt roads in the middle of the desert, it's 110 degrees outside, sun is scorching, there's no water anywhere, and you actually can smell this smell, and that's the smell of dead animals who have dropped along the roadside. There are carcasses that are rotting, and people are desperate. They don't have money, they don't have anything left. And our data and the data that we got for the story, scientific data and meteorologic data, shows that these droughts have been happening with increasing frequency and intensity. So what might have been a drought that happened once every 10 years, cyclical, regular, okay, we can plan for this, has suddenly started being something that happens every single year. That's out of the ordinary. We don't normally see that. And when these animals die, the family's backs are pushed up against a wall. So a father and mother of 8 children who might have wanted to send all of their kids to school until high school, they themselves probably had very little education. They wanted to do better for their own kids. And what's ended up happening is that they have to pull their daughters out of school because in this part of the country, there's a dowry system, which means that when you marry off your daughter, you receive gifts of livestock, clothing, milk, that kind of thing. And so the livestock is really what people need to restart their herd, to rebuild their lives. And that's basically what's happening up in the north. There's another component of the story that we were unable to report because of COVID, but I did want to just mention it, which is this is a region that practices female circumcision, which some of you might be familiar with. Unlike male circumcision, it's a very risky practice. It does often carry the same cultural significance. It marks the transition of a girl into a woman, and for many people it's a very sacred practice, but it also has some serious side effects and consequences for the girls who undergo it. And it is a prerequisite to marriage. So as you can imagine, if you have increased rates of girl marriage, you're also going to have increased rates of female circumcision. And this is undoing decades of progress that the Kenyan government has been working towards. They've put in laws against female circumcision. They've put in an 18 age limit for marriage, and yet they haven't been able to stick to those restrictions, limitations, and uphold those laws because of the disaster in the north. So that's the project I worked on in partnership with Time Magazine and with the support of the Pulitzer Center, and I will turn it over to Audrey.
Thanks, Neha. So you saw my...
Yeah, I saw. I was like looking at the time.
Okay. Really interesting project, and also really sobering that, women are still facing this. I guess we'll definitely have more to discuss on that. But before that, Pablo, maybe you can give us another side of the picture about your work with the Rainforest Defenders.
Cool. First, prior to I can speak Spanish as well. Oh, anyways, just wanted to remind that there's two people missing in the Amazon, and that the government is not doing anything but blame them. And making them responsible for what they were doing as if they were doing wrong by doing their work. So since I started working with land issues and stories of traditional people fighting for the land, over all this journey I found women both in the front lines but also taking care of their children, but especially in the front lines. Both in Mato Grosso do Sul or in Sao Paulo, protesting for the lands and the rights that are not being respected. And even in my country, Uruguay, a country that even today says that it has no indigenous women are leading the first retake of traditional land, which is something very important. And one thing that I found during all these journeys, and the question that I was thinking of was how these people is capable of resisting this way. And I realized that the answer isn't on how we conceive the land, how we conceive the concept of territory, which for our culture is something to conquer, to make a profit out of it. And in some way, when we think of the land, of the Amazon, it's a relationship that it's also related with with gender. We have Bolsonaro saying the Amazon is the woman that everyone wants to take to its bed. So it's the same relationship that's building this exploitation of the land. And to them, this land is their mother, is what gives them everything that they needed to survive. Is their rainforest, that rainforest is their supermarket, is their pharmacies. So I wanted to explore this relationship between people and the land, and I started by photographing them laying down on their land, so that way I could have their land as the background of the picture. But then I realized I needed something else, so I did a second picture of the land in question to see what are the threats that they are facing, and building this way, this strong bond of the people that they fiercely defend this land. And also bringing this powerful statement that is, they aren't without the land, and that land isn't without them. So this is Dani, this is Rika, she's a quilombola. Quilombolas are descendants from African slaves that managed to escape from their oppressors and found refuge on the rainforest. And Rika was the first woman in being elected as the president of that community, of her community. And she's also a teacher who believes in the power of education and the power that young people has to defend their lands. This is Cindy, the previous one. She's a Colombian Ticuna indigenous, and she's fighting in the triple border between Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, a region that is very close to where these journalists and these indigenous experts are missing right now. And she fights against human and mainly women and indigenous trafficking in that region. Then that's Dani, who is a LGBT woman who found on her LGBT struggle the power and the force to struggle to fight for her land, that it's being surrounded by soybean fields. And that is Paola. She's a Wayu indigenous from Venezuela and her family was forced to flee and leave their land, which is at the right side of the picture. And they now live in Colombia as refugees. So in order to visit her grandmother, who still lives there, they have to cross illegally that border. And something very interesting about this story is that border is not, it doesn't even a word, it's not even a word in their language. They don't have a word for border. They exist even before that the countries were created. So borders are something that they are now have to deal with. This is Vero. She's an Achuar indigenous leader from Ecuador, and she decided not to marry because she wanted to dedicate to take care of her people. Now she's a doctor in her community, and that house, which is hers, is all surrounded by medicinal plants that she uses to treat her people, combined with our medicine as well. And the final one, which is the latest story that we did, is about Daniela that is sitting here, and I think she can speak much better than me about the women in the Amazon.
Thank you, Pablo.
Oh, that's, I thought it was at the end, but anyways, that's a QR code that you can scan and see Dani's story that has a video and some pictures and a beautiful text from Francesc. which is from our Rainforest Defenders project that is funded by the Pulitzer Center. And you can save it for later.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pablo. Now we will hear from Daniela. There'll be translations.
Oi. Tirar aqui. Boa tarde a todas e todos. Quero agradecer, né, a oportunidade de estar aqui compartilhando um pouco da minha história, né, que não é só a minha história, mas é uma história. Vocês foram pegar o.
Yeah, sorry. So just give us a minute while we hand out the headsets.
Esperar um pouco.
Sim, espera só um pouquinho.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Do you want some water?
Sorry?
Okay.
Okay. Do you want some water?
Você escreveu o que vai dizer?
Eu vou ler uma parte de uma carta.
Porque vai ler uma parte. Fala com coração, com confiança.
To our virtual audience, apologies. We're just breaking to get headsets for everyone. That was our oversight, so apologies, but we'll be right back.
Thank you.
Acho que já. Quando for, pode me avisar.
Okay, looks like everyone's got their headsets. So, Daniela, over to you.
Então, agora todo mundo tem o tradutor. Então, boa tarde a todas e todos. Quero agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui compartilhando um pouco da minha história, mas é uma história que ela é coletiva, né? Acho que sou uma personagem que conta a história de várias pessoas, especialmente de muitas mulheres que estão no território lutando com seus corpos para defender a vida. E quando eu falo defender a vida, não é só a vida floresta, mas a vida de todas as pessoas que estão no território. Está funcionando a tradução?
Yeah.
There's no English?
Sorry, let's just give them a minute. Is there an English translation?
Espera aí, acho que vai ser assim.
Isso aqui me sola.
Quer que eu te traduza? Acho que perde.
Mas ele não fala, ele não traduz para o inglês, do português para o inglês?
Acho que não tem alguém traduzindo para inglês. Do you want me to translate?
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Ok,
Yeah, let's just do that.
Você vai traduzir.
vou fazer a mesma.
Okay.
Oh.
So sorry
Mas
about the
de novo.
technical difficulties. Should Pablo just translate?
Yeah, I can translate. Okay.
De novo? Tudo bem. Então, de novo, tudo zero. Então, boa tarde a todos e todas. Quero agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui hoje, contando um pouco da minha história, mas é uma história coletiva que narra trajetórias de muitas mulheres que...
Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank for being here. Actually, she wants, and she's here to tell a story that is collective. She's here representing many other women. You can go, pode ir.
Então, tá aqui hoje não é a Daniela Silva que está aqui, unicamente. São todas as mulheres que lutam em defesa da vida na Amazônia.
So not only myself, Daniela Silva, here that I'm talking, it's all the women that are fighting with their bodies on the Amazon rainforest.
Eu tinha preparado, eu não sei como é que vai ficar essa questão da tradução, porque eu tinha pensado em ler uma carta.
I was thinking of reading a letter, but I don't know. I think you can.
Tá. Eu quero começar com um trecho de uma carta que a gente construiu em 2019 no encontro chamado Amazônia, Centro do Mundo.
I want to start by reading a piece of a letter that we wrote in 2019 in an event that we called Amazon, the Center of the World.
E por que a Amazônia, Centro do Mundo? Porque a gente acredita que é preciso deslocar o que é centro e o que é periferia.
Why do we say that the Amazon is the center of the world? It is because we need to differentiate what's the center from the periferia?
From the periphery.
Periphery, okay.
Parte das elites políticas e econômicas do Brasil enxergam a floresta da mesma forma que enxergam nós, mulheres.
The majority of the powerful people looks at the Amazon the same way they look at us, women.
Como um corpo para violação e exploração.
Like a body to be exploited and violated.
As mulheres lideram as lutas na Amazônia. E como a floresta, são também, junto com a juventude negra e pobre, as que mais sofrem violência.
Women lead the struggle in the rainforest, and along with the well, I think I got lost. Women are leading the struggles in the Amazon, and as a rainforest, they are also, together with the people of color and the impoverished people, who suffers the violence even more. We need to stop the violation of our bodies. We will fight against all ways of death.
Sim. Então é isso, a gente precisa deslocar o que é centro, o que é periferia. Eu acho que é importante eu estar aqui hoje nesse evento da imprensa.
We need to differentiate what's in the center that what's in the periphery. It's very important for me to be here today.
Para entendermos que o território amazônico é um território diverso. O território amazônico não é só quando você olha do satélite e vê só a floresta, o verde e o rio.
We need to understand that the Amazon is way too diverse. It's not only what we only see when we look through satellites, that green wall of trees and the rivers.
É uma Amazônia que tem povos negros, população urbana que mora na cidade, mas também tem indígenas, tem quilombolas, tem ribeirinhos.
It's an Amazon that has people of color, has indigenous, has people who lives on the banks of the rivers, and a lot of traditional communities, people who lives in cities.
É importante a gente defender a floresta em pé. Mas, para que a floresta ela permaneça em pé, é preciso que essas pessoas que estão colocando os seus corpos também possam ter a vida garantida. Então,
it is important to defend the Amazon standing, but it's also important to defend the people that makes that tree standing possible.
E nesse momento tem 2 pessoas desaparecidas no Brasil.
And in this moment, there's 2 people missing in Brazil.
E o governo brasileiro faz caso com o que está acontecendo.
And the government is responsible of what's happening.
Por que eu estou dizendo isso?
Why I'm saying that?
Se um jornalista americano
If an American journalist
sofre esse tipo de violência,
is suffering this kind of violence,
imagine nós,
imagine what we suffer every day,
que colocamos o corpo
that we are
para defender a
standing on the
vida.
front lines to defend the life.
É isso que eu quero trazer. Eu quero trazer essa reflexão.
This is what I want you to think about.
É preciso dar visibilidade para as pessoas também.
It is necessary to give visibility to people.
Não existe floresta em pé sem as pessoas.
There's no rainforest without us.
E as mulheres
And women
são as que mais estão na linha de frente da luta, são as protagonistas dessa história também.
We are the protagonists of this struggle. We are standing on the front lines.
Eu acho que esse protagonismo ele vem muito dessa perspectiva feminina, do cuidado. Me perdoe alguns homens, mas eu acho que nós mulheres a gente pensa muito o futuro. Não só os homens são muito imediatistas, né? Pensa o agora.
I'm sorry for all the men here, but I think that women, maybe we look after the Amazon because of the perspective that we have about the future, and men usually think in a short term.
Então a gente precisa ver mais mulheres.
So we need to see more
Juntas.
women together.
Tem que ter o protagonismo, fortalecer o protagonismo,
Being
porque já
protagonist.
existe um protagonismo de mulheres na resistência na Amazônia. E eu não poderia deixar de vir aqui também resgatar uma reflexão muito importante.
I cannot be here without telling you something that's very important.
Que não dá mais para lutar pelo clima, pela Amazônia, sem que a gente envolva as crianças e as juventudes.
It's enough. We cannot keep fighting for the Amazon without involving children and the youth.
Eu venho de um território impactado por uma hidrelétrica, uma das maiores hidrelétricas do mundo, que é a hidrelétrica de Belo Monte.
I come from a land that has been widely impacted by the construction of one of the biggest hydroelectrical power dams in the world, which is Belo Monte.
Eu tive uma infância próximo dos rios, dos igarapés.
As I was a child, I grew up close to the river, close to the waterfalls.
A minha comunidade tinha uma forte rede, era uma rede muito forte de afeto, de solidariedade.
My community used to have a very strong relationship, a communitary relationship.
A gente residia entre ribeirinhos, pescadores, oleiros, barqueiros, população que tinha uma relação muito forte com o rio Xingu, que o rio Xingu ele é centro de toda a região.
We used to be a bunch of different people from the river, and we used to live near or at the banks of the river, on the Xingu River, which is the center and a very important river.
Ai, desculpa.
De boa.
Como vocês viram na foto do Pablo,
As you saw in my picture,
uma parte de onde eu morava, ela não existe mais.
the place where I used to live doesn't exist anymore.
A empresa que construiu o Belo Monte nos expulsou.
The company that built the dam evicted us and my community.
Por que eu estou falando isso?
Why I'm saying that?
Porque hoje tem uma geração de meninos e meninas
Because today there's an entire generation of children
que foram jogados na periferia da cidade,
that were
longe do
abandoned
rio, sem
in the
acesso ao
peripheries,
rio, sem acesso a essa rede que antes eu tive.
without access to the river and to the communitary relationships that I grew up with.
Existem crianças e jovens na Amazônia
There's
que moram
children
na
in the
Amazônia
Amazon.
e que não sabem que estão na Amazônia.
There's children in the Amazon that lives in the Amazon and they don't know that are a part of the Amazon.
Então, como é que essas crianças, esses jovens, vão defender algo que eles não se sentem parte?
So how are they going to defend something that they don't really understand that belong to that?
A gente só defende o que a gente ama, aquilo que a gente conhece.
We only defend what we love, what we know.
E é muito perverso o que fazem esses projetos que a gente quer desconstruir, porque grande projeto é aquilo que vem para alegrar as pessoas, para trazer vida.
Pode repetir? Desculpa. Pode repetir que eu me perdi?
Que a gente tem que desconstruir isso, né? Porque as pessoas falam, Belo Monte não é um projeto grandioso. Belo Monte é um projeto que veio empobrecer as pessoas.
We need to break with the idea of this our big wonderful projects. Belo Monte came to impoverish the people and the communities.
Então, é isso, assim, trazer essa reflexão de que a Amazônia ela não é só aquele verde que a gente olha no satélite, o rio, mas fico me emocionando. A Amazônia ela é diversa, né? Tem indígenas, tem ribeirinho, tem um povo que mora hoje na cidade que estão desflorestados. Desculpa.
So I want you all to think about this idea. It's much more than what we see on the satellites. There's an entire youth today that has been deforested.
Desflorestado. E a gente tem que reflorestar os corações das pessoas.
And we need to put their hearts back on the rainforest.
E eu acredito que isso a gente precisa fazer através das crianças, dos jovens, das juventudes.
And I think the way to do that is through working with the young people.
E desconstruir essa ideia de desenvolvimento, né? Porque quando vem esses grandes projetos, eles dizem que vão trazer saúde, educação, cidadania. Só que isso, por exemplo, no Brasil é algo que já era para ser feito sem moeda de troca. Desculpa.
And we really need to fight this idea of development. They say they will bring us wealth, health, and happiness, but this is not what's happening.
E uma coisa que eu quero chamar a atenção é esses grandes impactos na vida das crianças.
And I really want you to look at how big are the impact of these projects on the lives of the young children.
Hoje, a minha mãe, ela cuida de 2 sobrinhos meus.
Today, my mom looks after my nephews.
Neymar e a Maria Antônia.
Neymar and Maria Antônia.
Neymar e a Maria Antônia são 2 crianças que não têm pai e não têm mãe.
Neymar and Maria Antônia are 2 children that have no parents.
Então, por que eles não têm pai? Por que eles não têm mãe? Porque chegou Belo Monte e mudou a vida. O meu irmão foi morto. A violência trazida por esse empreendimento.
So why they don't have parents? Because Belo Monte arrived and they died. My brother was murdered.
Essa responsabilidade sempre fica para nós mulheres, né?
And that responsibility is always with us, women.
Que não temos apoio.
We don't have support.
Que a gente tem que reconstruir tudo do zero, né? E é por isso que eu estou aqui hoje.
And we have to build and rebuild everything from scratch. And that's
Espero
why
que
I'm
essa
here
mensagem ela chegue, ela transborde e que a gente consiga se mobilizar de verdade em defesa da vida, aí da vida de pessoas humanas e não humanas. Quando a gente coloca o nosso corpo contra a emergência climática, lá no Xingu, a gente está botando a nossa vida para defender a vida de vocês.
I want you
Também.
to remember to think about this. When we put our bodies in the front lines, we are doing this because of you too.
E a luta pela Amazônia é uma luta de todas nós.
And a struggle for the Amazon, it's of all of us. It belongs to all of us.
E a gente precisa amplificar as vozes das pessoas que estão na Amazônia.
We need to amplify the voices of the people of the Amazon,
Dos ribeirinhos, dos povos indígenas, das mulheres.
those from the riverine people, from the indigenous people, from the women,
E olhar para as crianças.
and look at the children.
O Brasil tem uma das leis muito conhecidas que é o Estatuto da Criança e do Adolescente, é mundialmente conhecido.
One of the world-renowned laws of Brazil is the laws about the children.
Que é o ECA. Ele
Qual
fala
ECA?
que o cuidado com a infância ele é da família, é do Estado e é da sociedade.
That says that children take care. It depends on the family, the state,
Os três.
e que mais?
E sociedade.
And the society.
Porque quando vem esses grandes empreendimentos, as crianças e os jovens não são escutados.
And when these big projects arrive, children are not being heard.
E as crianças precisam ser escutadas.
Children really need to be listened.
Por que eu estou enfatizando esse olhar com a infância, né?
Why am I emphasizing this thing of the children, the role of the children?
Porque eu compreendi com tudo isso que a gente passou, da gente ser expulso do nosso território. Eu lembro.
Because through my own story, I understood that being evicted from my territory.
Eu lembro que nós, crianças, naquela época antes de Belo Monte, a gente era um elo comunitário. Quando a mãe precisava sair,
I remember we had a really very powerful bond. Tem mais um minuto para falar.
Tá. Quando a mãe precisava sair para resolver alguma situação, a gente ficava aos cuidados da vizinha, da vizinhança.
It was our neighbors that look after us.
E se hoje, né, muitas mulheres estão na luta, né, botando seu próprio corpo na luta, e eu acredito que tem a ver com essa perspectiva de futuro, de imaginar o futuro. Para quem vai ficar depois, sabe?
And if women are putting their bodies on the front lines, it's because we are thinking of the future. To whom are we leaving this world as is?
E acho que é isso. Quero agradecer mais
thank
uma
you.
vez.
One more time.
Falar um pouco de um projeto que a gente está iniciando lá em Altamira, um projeto chamado...
And I wanted to mention you about this project. That's a project called Aldeias.
Projeto Aldeias, que tem como objetivo resgatar o sentimento de pertencimento amazônico de crianças, adolescentes.
Our goal is to bring back this feeling of belonging.
E juventudes que estão desflorestadas em consequência da hidrelétrica de Belo Monte.
To help all these people that has been deforested by Belo Monte.
Obrigada.
Thank you. You can have these flyers all over the place as well. And thank you.
E só queria enfatizar que não dá para cuidar, não dá para deixar a floresta em pé sem cuidar das pessoas, quem está no território.
Once again, it's not possible to look after the rainforest without looking after of the people that is making that possible.
E que a gente precisa fazer muito barulho porque tem 2 pessoas desaparecidas no país. E isso é perigoso. Para nós que somos ativistas, mas para todas as pessoas, jornalistas que vão para o Brasil.
Don't forget that there's 2 people missing, and that's dangerous for all of us, even activists and journalists.
Defender a vida não pode ser crime, muito pelo contrário, a gente tem que defender a vida. E se faz através da luta, mas também de levar a informação
To defend the
ética
life,
como tem que ser.
to defend life is not a crime.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. And thank you, Pablo, for translation. Just a note that the English translation is now available, and it's on channel 8. Channel 3, sorry. Thank you for that very, very heartfelt sharing, Danny. And I think most of us will want to hear more about Project Aldemas in a bit. I just wanted to share that coming from Southeast Asia, there's a lot of commonalities between the challenges that women face in other parts of the world and in our region as well. I think the data has shown that if you are particularly reliant on nature for your livelihoods, and if you have to rely on the natural environment for your resources like your water and your food, you are disproportionately affected by climate change. I've come across communities in Indonesia during the course of my reporting where I saw this firsthand. I visited a national park in Java, one of the main islands of Indonesia. And that forest, it's a huge forest, and it was a major watershed. It provided water for a lot of cities in the region, including in Jakarta, which was the capital. But the communities living around them would sometimes go into the forest to cut down the forest and to plant plantation crops there. And from that community, it was the women who had to get water. So some of the women that I met there would have to walk miles just to get water from a river nearby. I think they did not realize that, the forest that was sustaining their community was being affected. And I think that was a really clear implication, out of how many hours in a day they had to spend, how many walking there to the river source and back again. So I think, and on top of that, they had other household duties, caring for children. And I think if climate change affects our water resources, and with deforestation also affecting the quality of the water there, women would definitely have to suffer the brunt of it. But yet at the same time, Danny's story is really inspiring about how women were stepping up and starting programs like this to, foster that relationship that people in the village had with nature, because you don't know what you're losing until you know what you're missing, right? There were a lot of, so I sit on the Pulitzer Center's advisory committee for the Rainforest Journalism Fund, and a lot of the proposals that we receive are about land grabbing and a lot of macro issues. But there were also a couple about how women of indigenous communities recognized the value of medicinal herbs. I think just now in one of Pablo's photos, we also saw that lady who was the doctor of the community. And they were the gatekeepers of environmental knowledge that could nourish the people around them. And women also have the capability to galvanize their communities into action. So I think even though the different parts of the world are so different from one another, there's a common trend that shows, and studies have also shown that women and girls are disproportionately affected by climate change, and this is why we need to be aware of their voices so they can be included in policy making. They can be included in adaptation plans when we deal with the climate crisis. So I'm sure many of you have questions, and I'll just start while you guys think of some questions. And I guess, Neha, I was wondering whether you can chat more about the challenges of reporting on this intersection between gender and climate, over the course of your work.
Sure, thank you. So there were a number of challenges. Can I move this up? There were a number of challenges that my team and I faced when we were doing this reporting. I think the first and most significant is gaining access to the communities that we wanted to report about. Doing a story like the one that we did in what is a very kind of insular community in northern Kenya would not have been possible without working through and with a local activist, similar to the work that Danny's doing. So we teamed up with a woman named Nuria Gallo, and she is in many ways kind of the star of this project, because herself was circumcised as a child and married off. She ended up managing to leave that marriage after having several children with her husband, which is not an easy thing to do in this part of the world. And it was through her that we were introduced to the community. They would not have let us anywhere near these girls that we were able to interview if we did not have someone to introduce us and vouch for us and talk about why we were there and what we were trying to achieve. We actually attended, and some of the footage you saw in the beginning was from this, we attended the marriage of a young girl, which as a journalist is obviously really kind of distressing because you're there to capture the story, and yet at the same time you're capturing something that is totally against your conscience. And so you kind of have to thread the needle there and walk a fine line between your work as a reporter and kind of your moral center. So that was one of the most important things. And Nuria is now an activist working with communities in northern Kenya to ensure that girls do not get circumcised and married off young. She's fighting with the girls as partners to prevent that from happening. One of the other issues that we had too was around data. Kenya has more data than many of its neighboring countries, but that doesn't really mean that it has a lot of data publicly available. There's some stuff that's done through the United Nations, which is where we got a lot of the numbers that we relied on. But doing a story like this, you really need to be able to show concrete trends. It's not enough to just give anecdotal evidence and say, I spoke with 3 women in the North and they say this is happening. If you really want your story to have impact, you kind of have to back it up with trends. And that was the hard part for us because the record keeping is essentially not there. So we cobbled together data from NGOs, from the United Nations, a little bit of government data, and then we kind of backed that up with anecdotal reporting where we visited schools, we visited communities, and of course we attended a wedding and saw for ourselves what was happening. So those are 2 of the biggest challenges, I think, is actually gaining access to the communities and building a rapport of trust so that they will speak to us, they will open up, and they'll trust us to tell their stories the right way and in a way that reflects what's really happening on the ground and not kind of fitting into a Western agenda. I think that was something that people were quite worried about. And then the other issue, the obvious issue of lack of reliable data.
Thanks, Neha. I just want to open up the floor to any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Okay, then I'll pose my next question to Danny. Could you share a bit more from the perspective of if a journalist coming into your community to report on your stories, how can that be done in a more sensitive way that's respectful of your cultures? Neha did say that was one big challenge, right? Getting the communities to trust journalists. How do you think journalists can approach this more sensitively?
Eu acho que primeiro tem uma coisa aqui que dando eco. Tem uma coisa interessante que a Eliane Brum ela fala, né, que a gente precisa deslocar os corpos, né, para entender. Eu acho que esse movimento de se deslocar de
Yeah, sorry, it's not working. Oh. Sorry, Pablo.
As Eliane Brum says, we need to dislocar, to move, to transport our bodies to the location.
Se deslocar e entender, né?
And to understand.
Entender o local, principalmente a Amazônia. A Amazônia ela é diversa.
It's working now?
Tá? Então melhor.
Pode falar à vontade agora.
Acho que primeiro tem que fazer esse esforço mesmo de ir ao chão, ao território e se desprender de muitas coisas, né? Eu acho que principalmente dessa ideia colonialista de imaginar um território homogêneo, né? Porque quando você chega lá no território, você pensei que eu ia ver só indígenas pelados, mas não. Chegando lá, tu vai ver uma cidade, por exemplo, Altamira, uma cidade da Amazônia que é muito hoje urbanizada, por exemplo. Você vai querer visitar a Terra do Meio, por exemplo, não vai achar que você vai... Será que ele vai... Tem alguns termos, será que ele vai entender o que eu vou falar?
Pode tentar, eu acho.
Chegar na Terra do Meio e achar que, chegando lá em Altamira, você vai fazer a cobertura em dois dias, por exemplo. É um território de rios, são dias de barco, né? Então, acho que entender a particularidade do território é muito importante para você chegar junto das comunidades. E eu acho que tem uma questão que é de respeitar, né, o local, as pessoas. O tempo das pessoas é diferente, não é um tempo... O tempo não é o nosso, né? É diferente. Vamos ali fazer uma reportagem, eu te levo ali no teu território, e aí você acaba, se você criar uma expectativa, você pode se frustrar, porque tem essa questão da temporalidade, né? A temporalidade ela é diferente, né? Então, acho que você tem que ser uma pessoa ética para chegar no local e a gente ter confiança, ainda mais no contexto atual do mundo, né? A gente precisa desconfiar de todo mundo, né? E você vai fazer uma matéria sobre mim, mas aí, onde é que você vai expor isso, né? Porque depois você pode expor, falar coisas íntimas e sensíveis da pessoa, né? Depois sai no jornal, e aí quem fica lá somos nós. Como é que a gente vai lidar com uma situação, né? Somos nós que estamos de frente com os grileiros, fazendeiros, os que mandam matar, em outras palavras, são esses, né? Então, tem que saber como coloca. Eu acho que uma pessoa que eu admiro muito, assim, que está aqui, que tem esse cuidado, é a Eliane. Assim, hoje a gente tem uma confiança muito grande com ela. Primeiro que ela fez esse movimento, né? Ela foi para lá, se enraizou, vivencia junto com a comunidade as dores, as alegrias. E eu acho que o jornalista ele não pode ser aquele jornalista que não tem um pé no chão. Acho que tem que ter o pé no chão, né? Entender que a gente vive em mundos diversos. Aqui, quando eu cheguei aqui, nesse lugar, em Washington, eu falei, nossa, que é diferente, né? Então, como é que você vai chegar lá também com a mesma postura? Será que você vai chegar lá com a mesma postura de Washington? Não, lá é diferente, né? Eu acho que tem que ter isso, assim, entender o território é importante, mas esse movimento assim, de você se descolonizar, eu acho que é muito difícil, eu acho que não é fácil, mas é preciso, assim, descolonizar a mente, descolonizar os corpos. Não sei se eu...
Okay, thank you, Danny. Actually, Pablo, on that note, I was wondering if you could share how you approach this topic sensitively. I mean, as a man reporting on the intersection between gender and climate change. So how did you approach this series that you did?
I don't think I have the answer, but I'm trying to build a methodology and a way to do my work that I think it's more aligned to what I think, and it's a whole journey of learning and making mistakes. But I do hope we live in a society that will judge us not by our mistakes, but what we do through them. To me, as a photographer, I think that there's a lot of ego around us because the way we build the image of ourselves as photographers is very related to that, to a hero, you know? It's like we are building the image of ourselves as heroes, and especially when we work in things like in the Amazon, which is a place full of exoticism. Sometimes we end up believing that we are very heroic by doing what we do. And I think that, to me, it's like demolishing that way of thinking of ourselves as photographers.
How do you do that? How do you demolish that?
I think that it's like when you start having other references. For example, when we study photography, our references are white privileged men that went to exotic places, or maybe they went to other places, different places, and they made them exotic. And they were recognized by that. And the world today, it's very different. And what I found is, like, every story is really going deep inside you. You know, you are in front of people that it's opening their lives and their entire intimacy to you, and that is something that you need to respect. So I think I'm always very touched and very moved by the stories I work with, and it's the strongest thing I've experienced, and it's even stronger than the image that we can build about being heroes and about being cool and posing for a picture, you know. So to me, it's about that. I think that it's so wonderful when you can establish a horizontal connection with the people that you're working with, and that I'm learning through this. I don't go there with the answers, and what I try to convince myself is that I don't know nothing, and I'm there to learn. But we cannot go there without our package of assumptions and preconceptions, and that's, as Dani said, the biggest challenge. I'm now reading a book of a Nigerian sociologist that's called Oyerunke Oyewundi, and she brings this idea that is wonderful, that she has, the book is called The Invention of Women, and what she said is that the image of male and woman, it's like a Western category, and it's a big mistake using these categories, these Western categories, to understand every community that we visit. And it's very powerful. It's a very powerful idea. Because we see the things and the world not as it is, but as we are. And I think that it's something that really need to address as journalists and as photographers. And also, when it comes to photography, how we photograph these people. I've dealt with editors saying, "Oh, if they are indigenous, why they don't look like indigenous?" You know, and I think that image has a strong power of building our understanding of the world, and we have a huge responsibility of trying to be aware and stop like building stereotypes or reinforcing stereotypes that are already built. But it's something I'm still working on, and it's not the final answer. It's just an experience, an experimentation as well.
Neha, any tips that you could share from your experience?
Regarding what?
About reporting sensitively on these issues.
Yeah, so this is a challenge that I face quite often. I am a Western woman working in a community that is first patriarchal often and quite male dominated, but also I'm not Kenyan, I'm not Somali, so I am very much an outsider going into these communities, and that's something that I always find daunting. To be quite honest, I'm afraid of getting it wrong. I'm afraid of, reporting something that is insensitive or does put my preconceptions and my baggage into the story in a way that does not accurately reflect what is going on. And I think, there is a component of risk-taking and putting yourself out there that you have to take on when you are doing stories about different cultures and communities. You know, I think what Pablo was saying is right. You have to go in eyes open, leave your baggage at the door, and to the best of your ability, go in as a blank canvas and try to learn. So, for example, the story that I worked on about the female circumcision, it was originally meant to be a story focused on climate change, but we did end up pivoting. Still a Pulitzer-supported project, but we looked at the impact of COVID-19 on female circumcision rates. And that was a really great story experience for me, because that was something where, to be honest, I sort of did go in with preconceptions about the practice. It's very widely condemned in the international community, and the WHO and the United Nations have simply said that this is an unacceptable practice. And I worked with an amazing editor who worked with me to understand the other side of that coin. So why is this practice so important for women? Why is this so culturally important? And what are some of the reasons that women might still engage in this practice beyond the idea of force or coercion? And I interviewed a lot of African women from different parts of the continent who strongly believe in the practice, and they think that it's something that should continue. Many of them chose to be circumcised as adults, you know, obviously giving it a little bit of a different spin than forcing a young girl to be circumcised. And that doesn't take away from the stories of the young girls I spoke to who said that they didn't want to and that they were either held down or forced. That is true, but also at the same time, it also can be true that there are women who choose to do this and they understand the significance of the practice, and it's something they believe in and something that they voluntarily undergo for their own personal belief system. And so I think also trying to stay away from the black and white is very important. You know, it's very easy to go into a scenario and say, well, this is good or this is bad, or these people are doing this or they're doing that. Here are the good guys, here are the bad guys, but that's not always the way it works. There can be two things that are true at once, and although editors can sometimes cut out nuance from a story, I think it's important that we continue to push for that nuance. Longer word counts, making sure that we can get complexity into stories that we're telling, because without that, then we're continuing to push an oversimplified, often Western-centric narrative, and that does a disservice not only to the people we're reporting about, but also to our readers who are reading to learn and to understand and to grow.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Neha. Any questions from the audience? Because I could go on all day. All right, then there was a question that was submitted by one of our audiences online, and this is for, I guess I could pose it to Danny first. So the question is, how do you think we can translate awareness about, you know, the gender dimension to climate change into policy? So you started Project Aldeias, and I think that fits into that, you know, building awareness and appreciation among children to protect the Amazon. What do you hope to see in terms of policy change?
Como você acha que pode ser toda essa questão sobre gênero e tal pode virar política pública, por exemplo? Como se traduz? E ela falou do teu projeto, que você já está fazendo isso.
Tá. Eu acredito que a mudança, no Brasil, ela não vai acontecer pela via da política partidária. A gente tem exemplos disso. O que vai mudar a situação do país são... Oi?
It's not working again. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties, but Pablo, could you please translate?
I believe that the way is not through. We cannot still waiting for public policies coming from the government.
E a mulher na sociedade, ela tem feito o trabalho de formiguinha, né? Eu acho que quem vai fazer esse trabalho, essa mudança, é o trabalho de formiguinha, da gente conversar com os nossos vizinhos, de ir para a comunidade.
The way of doing it is seeing it as an ant work, in which we work a little every day. We talk with our neighbors, to the people.
Reunir o vizinho, a vizinha, falar da importância da gente, né, mudar os nossos hábitos com relação ao meio ambiente, trabalho de...
to speak together and to change our habits, especially regarding to the environment.
E a mulher tem essa capacidade de mobilizar, né, e de, através do cafezinho, de se reunir ali e de, às vezes, sem dizer que é uma formação política, a pessoa diz: você não acha que o sol está muito quente? Você não acha que isso não está relacionado com, por exemplo, a construção...
And women has the power to build that, to do that, through chatting, to interacting with others, and it's not about a political schooling or formation. It's about having a conversation. Like, don't you think the sun is too hot today, or?
A sociedade civil ela tem um papel muito importante, né, de mobilizar a comunidade, de mobilizar os vizinhos.
Society has a very powerful and important task, which is to engage people and engage the neighborhood.
E a gente precisa, falou, né, no Brasil, né, pensar o Brasil daqui a 10 anos, por exemplo.
And when we address Brazil, we need to think of how it's going to be Brazil from here to 10 years.
E esse trabalho de consciência... Voltou?
Voltou.
Então, o que ela falou?
So, I'm off right now. Okay. Keep going? Oh, okay. Pode seguir. E eu vou traduzir. Então, pode seguir, só não se empolga que eu preciso depois traduzir isso.
Então, até me perdi. Mas é isso, assim, pensar o Brasil daqui a 10 anos atrás e tem que começar a construir hoje. Essa construção de conversar com os mais jovens. Eu acho que quem está na luta, por exemplo, há mais tempo...
We need to think Brazil from here to 10 years and start building that today.
Precisa haver um diálogo intergeracional. Então, os mais velhos, conversando com as juventudes, falar da importância da conscientização, de cuidar, né, do planeta, de cuidar da floresta, de cuidar da vida.
We need to build a conversation between different generations about how to take care of this world, how to.
E é preciso pensar também nessa nova geração de meninos e de meninas que não gostam, por exemplo, de estar em espaços como esse, porque para eles é uma coisa muito chata. Estar sentado assim, mais de 2, 3 horas falando sobre emergência climática.
And we need to start thinking about the children that doesn't feel comfortable sitting on places like this, listening to 2 or 3 hours about the climate emergency.
Tem que se adaptar, é isso, tem que se adaptar à realidade deles. Eu acho que o tempo ele sempre nos pede isso, né, da gente se reinventar nas linguagens, nas lutas.
We need to adapt to their language, to their way of understanding. We need to reinvent ourselves the way we speak.
E por isso que a gente está propondo o projeto Aldeias, que ele tem o objetivo de tratar de temas que são sensíveis de uma forma mais leve, que é através.
And that's why we are with this project called Aldeias, because we want to address these issues in the communities in a more friendly way, so they can engage.
Através da música, da arte, da poesia, do grafite.
Through music, art, poetry, graffiti.
Porque é preciso trazer essas gerações. E isso é um atrativo.
Bring them back.
Porque existem várias formas de lutar. Então, a poesia é uma forma, o grafite, a música, e eu sei que já acabou o tempo.
there's
Yes.
many ways to struggle, and yeah. That.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. But I think we don't have much time left, but I think Neha, you want to chime in here on like translating awareness into action?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, which an editor of mine mentioned when I first started doing a lot of reporting on women and girls, which is, stories about women and girls aren't really stories about women and girls. They're stories about people. We are over half the population, and yet in so many publications and websites, wherever you look, there's like a women's section, right? But why is it that stories about women and girls are relegated to the section that presumably only women will read? And so I think another, like as relates to this, right? We need to mainstream these stories. There are obviously a lot of men in the audience, and that's fantastic. But often when these panels happen, it's mostly women in the audience. And we're the ones listening to stories about ourselves. And I just think a big part of this and bringing things into the mainstream, creating action around them, is to have these stories front and center on the front page of the New York Times, on the front page of the Washington Post, or wherever you're publishing your work, rather than necessarily having them in the women and gender section in the back. So that's my closing thoughts.
All right, thank you. We're so sorry about the technical difficulties. And I'm sure you guys, we don't have much time left, but I'm sure the panelists would take your questions or emails, and you can just reach out to them online. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the next session. Thanks.